Hello, how's it going? I'm Clancy, the bee man, and today I'm going to show you how to make each of the three different types of native bee hotels for the over 2,000 species of native bees that we have here in Australia. So why should you build a bee hotel, you ask? Well, it's important because insects are facing a range of different threats, and we've seen around 9,000 different species of invertebrates, including insects, go extinct since European settlement. And insects continue to face a range of threats, like habitat clearing for agriculture and housing development, pesticides and insecticide use, and climate change altering the timing of flowering. And what bee hotels are good for is providing the nesting habitat for native bees to nest in your garden. And this can be really complemented by planting native indigenous flowering plants in your garden too. Like I said, there's three different types. There's one for drilling into native timber or native hardwood. There's one by collecting bundles of pithy stems, bamboos, flower stems, anything sort of like that. You can make it nice and pretty with some bark or something. And then there's also making bee hotels for ground nesting bees, like the blue banded bee. Did you know that there's over 2,000 native bee species here in Australia? And of those, only 11 make honey. So there's actually a lot of different solitary species here in Australia. And what I mean by solitary bees is that every female will make her own nest. They don't have queens and live in hives. Every female is their own queen. And every female will find a hole or a tunnel from a wood-boring grub or a hollow stem where she'll go and lay an egg and collect pollen and seal that off. And so it is a misconception that all bees make honey and all bees live in hives, because we have a lot of solitary native bee species here in Australia. And they nest in different things in the natural environment, like in the inside of reeds, in the tunnels from wood-boring grubs in deadwood, in the ground. About 70% of species will nest in the ground, in any small spaces like gum nuts or fern fronds, or even in the flower spikes of grass trees. So first up, to make a bee hotel out of bamboo and other pithy stems, what you can do is with a pair of secateurs, and you want to be cutting, if you're using bamboo, right behind the node, so that you get one end which is closed off by the node of the bamboo, and then the other end which is nice and open, and you put all of the ends that are open facing the same way. And when you have all the ends nice and pretty facing all the same way, they should look like this. And you put that towards the northeast so that they get the morning sunlight, so that the insects are nice and active. And in this bee hotel you can expect to see reed bees, mast bees, leafcutter bees, resin bees, wasp mimic bees, heaps of different diversity of ones that you'll attract to something like this. The next bee hotel that we've got is by drilling into native hardwood. And this is to mimic the holes or the tunnels from wood-boring grubs like witchetty grubs. And how we can do this is just by drilling straight down into the hardwood, and then doing that with a range of different sized drill bits, from as small as 3mm for the little mast bees and different things, all the way up to like about 9mm for the larger things like leafcutter bees. And what you can expect to find in one of these timber hardwood native bee hotels is leafcutter bees, wasp mimic bees again, mast bees, grass-carrying wasps seem to like these, and native mud wasps like these as well. A favourite of these would have to be, the resin bees or leafcutter bees. Third type of bee hotel is for the ground nesting bees. And so what we can do with this is we're mixing up sand and clay, and we want to combine these. So we're adding the sand so that it's got a bit of grit, so that the bees can excavate it and dig it like they would if it was a clay bank along the river. A lot of ground nesting bees seem to love in between the bricks on a house in the mortar. Get it into a nice firm mixture and make those Play-Doh hot dogs. Then what you can do is either pack it into a Besa brick or into a 2-litre milk container. Just like that. In the ground nesting bee hotels, you can expect blue banded bees, cuckoo bees, Lasioglossum, Lipotriches, and a range of different other ground nesting native bee species. These make up for about 70% of the 2,000 native bee species here in Australia. Ground nesting bee hotels you can put on the ground, you can stack them up to sort of simulate like a clay bank along a river. One thing you can also do for ground nesting bees is just to leave a bare patch in your garden which isn't covered in a thick layer of mulch or stones or anything, which is just bare ground open for the ground nesting bees to nest in. And I'd also like to touch on why it's a lot better to make your own bee hotel rather than buying a commercially available bee hotel like this one. And that's because these have a few issues. The main one being that they're usually imported from overseas and they're fumigated at custom. So this is toxic to insects like native bees, or they've been made by treated materials. And they're also full of design flaws. So this is the biggest drill bit that I would use to make the bee hotels. And that is much smaller in comparison than a lot of these different holes. And then if I turn it sideways, they're also very narrow and there's not as much depth for the native bees to create their nests in. And one other thing with why it's important to make the bee hotels with extra depth is because in each one of these, this is where a female solitary bee will create her nest. And she'll travel to the very back of the nest where she'll lay an egg and then go to flowers and collect pollen, and then she'll seal it off as if like its own bedroom as a part of a house. And she'll continue doing this as she goes along the distance of the nest. So don't worry about buying commercial bee hotels and have a go at making your own. And it's even better when you're using locally indigenous, native hardwood and reeds and flower stems, because this is what the native bees will be searching for in the natural environment to nest in. And you're providing that in your own backyard. A reminder of how and where to set them up is the cavity nesting hotels. You set up facing the northeast, so they're getting plenty of sunlight, and you can hang them up. You can put them on fence posts, you can put them on letterboxes, so they're off the ground, but somewhere near a garden or flowers where there's going to be some native bee traffic. And when you set it up in the garden, you want to angle it a little bit downwards so that the holes don't fill up with water. Or for that same reason, you can add a roof so that it protects it from the rain in a similar way. So what are you waiting for? Go and make your bee hotel today.